This is a video to show you the inlay technique that's used within my Adelia Tee design. You have these different motifs created throughout the yoke of the piece with this woven inlay effect. You have a slightly thicker yarn that's used and held double for the inlay motifs, and then it's a slightly finer yarn that's used for the background. The background yarn is the one that's knitting the whole time, and the inlay yarn is just laid to the front and the back of the fabric, creating different floats. So I'm going to show you in a little swatch how the method works. I have one of the charts from the pattern, which displays the inlay within the yoke section. So the way that the inlay is charted, it has these little darker squares which show where that float of inlay is going to be seen on the right side of the fabric. So every time you see a gray square within the chart of those inlay patterns, that means that the yarn will be floating on the right side. And when you see the white squares, those refer to the background yarn, and that means that the inlay yarn is going to be floating at the back of the fabric so that you won't be able to see it. I've cast on in the round, and I've got my background yarn that's knitting, and then I have my inlay yarn, which for this pattern, it's being used as a double thickness. To introduce the inlay yarn into the knitting, then I leave a tail that's about 6 to 8 inches or 15 to 20 centimeters that I can weave in later. And then I'm just going to lay the yarn in between my needles with the tail at the back of the knitting. I can see in my chart that I've got one inlay stitch. So with my inlay yarn at the front of the fabric, I'm going to knit one stitch with my background yarn. And then with the chart, I can see that I've got 3 stitches that are just my background color stitches. So now I'm going to take the inlay yarn and I'm going to bring that in between the needles to the back of the fabric. And I'm going to knit 3 stitches. Then I can see I've got 1 stitch, which is an inlay stitch. So now the inlay yarn I'm going to bring in between the needles to the front. You want to make sure that the floats are a nice even size. So your stitches that you've knitted on your right needle, just make sure that they're evenly spread, they're not too tight. And then with the inlay yarn at the front of the fabric, I'm going to knit 1 stitch. Then I have a background color stitch. So the inlay yarn will come to the back of the fabric where I can knit that 1 stitch. And then I have another inlay stitch. So the yarn will come to the front of the fabric while I knit that stitch. Then I've got 3 background stitches. So the inlay yarn will go to the back of the fabric and I'll knit 1, 2, 3. Then I've got 1 inlay stitch. So the yarn will come to the front. And then finally, I've got 1 background stitch. So the inlay yarn is at the back while I knit that stitch. So that's the first 12 stitches repeated within that section of the yoke. I'm going to repeat that all the way across, and then we'll have a look at starting the next round. So I've just finished that first round. And now, because we are working in the round and the inlay is within a continuous band of pattern, then we simply just repeat the next round again in that circular construction. So I'd have a look at the second round of the chart. I can see that I've got 2 inlay stitches on the chart. So my inlay yarn will come to the front. I'll knit those 2 inlay stitches. Then I've got a background stitch. So I bring the yarn to the back and then I'll do my background stitch. So I'll work all the way across every single round. You're just repeating that exact same process, just following those repeats on the chart. When you finish the section of the inlay, then you can just cut the inlay yarn. Again, leave a tail that can be woven in later. And just finish off any kind of remaining ends. And then once everything's been off the needle and blocked, you'll find that your floats will kind of even out. If you see that there's anything that needs to be adjusted a little bit prior to weaving in the ends, then you can always just kind of grab hold of the floats with a tapestry needle and just pull the tension in anywhere that you think needs to be slightly adjusted. Once it's blocked, everything will lay flat and neat and have a nice finished effect.